Have you ever wondered, what if everything you've ever been taught about success, about purpose, about becoming someone was wrong? Not slightly off, not missing a few pieces, but fundamentally backward? What if the very act of chasing meaning was the thing keeping it away? Welcome to a journey that might feel less like watching a YouTube video and more like waking up inside your own life. You won't find 5-step programs here. There are no affirmations, no productivity hacks, no top 10 rules for inner peace. What you will find is a question that refuses to die. Who are you when you stop trying to be someone? We live in a culture obsessed with becoming. From the moment we can walk, we're trained to reach. Reach for grades, for followers, for status, for enlightenment, for control. We build identities like scaffolding layer upon layer of effort, image, and narrative, all in hopes that if we climb high enough, we'll finally feel whole. But what if that scaffolding is what's keeping us from touching the ground? Today's video isn't about adding one more idea to your mind. It's about subtracting the need for more. It's about exploring the radical possibility that you are not broken, that the part of you endlessly chasing answers isn't the hero of your story, but the reason you feel lost in the first place. I know these aren't easy questions, but this is not a video made for easy answers. This is for the part of you that's tired. Tired of becoming. Tired of pretending. Tired of the subtle pressure to always be somewhere else. Someone else. Doing something else. If you've ever reached a goal and felt that empty, now what? Afterward, if you've ever succeeded and still felt incomplete, if you've ever looked at your life and whispered, "Is this all there is?" then you are not alone. And you're not broken. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Because here's the twist. Real freedom isn't what you think. It doesn't come from winning. It doesn't come from letting go. It doesn't even come from spiritual awakening. It comes from stopping the chase entirely. Not giving up, but stepping off the treadmill of self-improvement and sitting down in the dirt of your real, messy, miraculous life. This video is not a solution. It's a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, what you see in it will change the way you move through the world. Before we dive into this deeply human and deeply paradoxical journey, I want to ask you for a very human favor. If you've ever felt that this kind of conversation matters, if you believe that philosophy isn't just for textbooks, but for surviving 3 a.m. thoughts and existential dread, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might be silently carrying the same questions. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're building something here, a space where we're allowed to not have it all figured out. And if you want to help keep this channel alive and ad-free, consider supporting via Super Thanks. Every little bit helps me continue creating content that speaks to the soul, not just the algorithm. All right, take a breath. Jarring realization that everything we've built our confidence upon is fragile. We feel lost, unanchored, staring into a world that feels chaotic, indifferent, and at times painfully cruel. For many people, this moment doesn't arrive through academic exploration or philosophical curiosity, but through experience. The death of a loved one, the failure of a relationship, a health scare, or simply waking up one morning with the crushing weight of, why does it all feel so meaningless? This sense of existential disorientation is not reserved for scholars or thinkers. It is deeply human. You could be a teenager who suddenly feels like life has no direction, a middle-aged parent who wonders if their sacrifices were worth it, or a successful executive who realizes the trophies and promotions didn't bring peace. This is the true entry point to philosophy, not reading Plato or studying Buddhism, but lying awake at night with a quiet ache in your chest, not from heartbreak or stress, but from the unnamable weight of simply existing. In this moment, a series of questions surface, questions that are not just intellectual, but visceral. Who am I? Becomes more than a philosophical riddle. It starts to feel like a survival question. Why am I suffering? Doesn't seek a medical or psychological diagnosis, but a deeper spiritual answer. What is really happening here? Asks not about world events or daily routines, but about the structure of reality itself. It's not uncommon to hear someone in their 40s, after building a home, a family, a career, whisper in the dark. Is this all there is? These questions have haunted humanity across cultures and centuries. The ancient Greeks had their tragedies. The Upanishads of India are filled with existential queries. Christian mystics, Zen masters, and poets from Rumi to Rilke all echoed the same themes. Yet today, these questions often remain buried beneath consumerism, distraction, and relentless productivity. In the modern world, instead of confronting them, we scroll, we work, we buy. But beneath the surface, the questions persist like a distant hum. This is not weakness. It is the very condition of consciousness. Alan Watts recognized this not as a flaw, but as a feature of being alive. He described the world not as a place to be conquered or controlled, but as a dance we are invited into unpredictable, mysterious, and at times terrifying. The existential pain we feel is not a glitch in the system. It's the system speaking to us in its rawest form. Consider how common it is for people to hit a crisis after achieving everything they thought they wanted. Think of Jim Carrey, who once said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer." Or Anthony Bourdain, whose worldly success and outward confidence masked a deep inner suffering. Their stories are not anomalies, they're signals. They tell us that the real suffering isn't out there, but in here, inside of us, when we've done everything right and still feel like something's wrong. We are taught from childhood that life has a formula. Grow up, study, get a good job, find a partner, buy a house, have kids, retire. But no one tells us what to do when the formula doesn't deliver the peace it promised. And so, we're left adrift. We may be surrounded by people, yet feel deeply alone. We may be busy, yet feel aimless. We may be praised, yet feel unseen. This disconnect between outer success and inner reality is the breeding ground for existential suffering. And so, philosophy begins not in the classroom, but in the pit of the soul. When the world no longer makes sense, when the stories we've inherited fall apart, when our roles and identities feel like masks, this is when the real questions arise. What is this thing called life? What am I supposed to do with this strange, beautiful, painful gift? Why does it feel like I'm constantly reaching for something I can't name? Watts, like many spiritual teachers, didn't offer easy answers. He didn't say just meditate or just be positive. Instead, he invited us to sit with the discomfort, to stop running from the questions and start listening to them. He suggested that our sense of separation from the world, from others, from nature, from ourselves is at the core of our pain. That we live as if we are isolated bubbles floating in an uncaring sea, when in truth we are the sea itself. But that realization doesn't come instantly. First, we have to feel lost. We have to feel like something's wrong. Because paradoxically, that's where the healing begins. When a person breaks down and admits, "I don't know who I am anymore," that's not the end of the road, it's the start of the real one. Only in that humility can something deeper arise. You don't need to become a monk or a philosopher to confront these questions. You just need to be honest. You need to be willing to say, "I don't have it all figured out." Because that moment of surrender, of letting go of certainty, is the moment the door opens. Not to answers. It is the alarm clock that shakes us out of autopilot. It is the crack in the wall that lets the truth shine through. Yes, it hurts, but what it reveals can be transformative. It reveals that we are not machines or roles or stories. We are not what we do. We are not what we achieve. We are the awareness behind it, all the part that sees, feels, and wonders. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of something real. People are remarkably skilled at inventing distractions to avoid discomfort. When faced with fear, confusion, or emptiness, most of us don't sit quietly to understand what's going on inside. Instead, we reach outward. We pursue money, relationships, promotions, likes, followers, and accolades, not because these things are inherently meaningful, but because they give us something to chase, something to do. This is the trap of modern life. A young adult enters the workforce, hoping that a six-figure salary will buy freedom. An artist posts their work online, waiting for validation through comments and shares. The root isn't always greed, it's often insecurity. People want to feel secure, valued, and complete. The culture reinforces this by praising achievement and material wealth as the ultimate goals. So we chase. But here's the paradox. The more we chase, the more elusive satisfaction becomes. The moment we achieve one milestone, we're already worried about the next. A person gets promoted and feels relief briefly before anxiety creeps back in. What if I can't maintain this? What's the next step? Will this be enough? It's the hedonic treadmill, a term psychologists use to describe how we return to a baseline level of happiness no matter what we achieve. No matter how fast we run, the finish line keeps moving. You don't have to look far to see examples of this in the real world. Think of Robin Williams' brilliant, beloved, successful by every imaginable metric, yet silently suffering until the end. Or Kurt Cobain, whose art touched millions, but who couldn't escape his inner darkness. Or Anthony Bourdain, who traveled the world, ate the best food, met fascinating people, and still took his own life. These aren't anomalies. They're reminders that outer abundance doesn't guarantee inner peace. Even in less dramatic cases, the emptiness is real. The corporate executive who makes more money than they could ever spend but feels dead inside. The influencer who posts smiling photos but privately battles anxiety. The newly retired millionaire who feels lost without a reason to wake up in the morning. We're told these are first world problems, but dismissing them misses the point. If external success truly healed the soul, these people would be glowing with joy. Instead, many are quietly unraveling. What's more troubling is how our society not only overlooks this truth, but actively denies it. Advertisements constantly tell us that the next purchase will bring happiness. Wellness culture insists that the right smoothie, the right retreat, or the right app will bring balance. Social media rewards curated appearances, not authentic experiences. We're drowning in images of people who seem to have it all, which makes our internal discomfort feel like personal failure. This leads to a deeper issue: shame. When people achieve what they were told would make them happy and still feel empty, they begin to believe something is wrong with them. I should be happy. Why am I not? This shame makes them hide, pretend, and push harder. They double down on the chase, hoping that maybe more will finally be enough. But more is never enough when the source of the pain is inside. Alan once pointed out that seeking external solutions to internal problems is like trying to fix your reflection in a mirror by polishing the glass. No matter how clear the surface, if your face is frowning, the reflection will too. In psychological terms, we cannot solve emotional or existential discomfort with material tools. You can't buy your way out of fear. You can't earn your way out of loneliness. You can't impress your way out of shame. This doesn't mean material things are bad. Money, comfort, and recognition can enhance life, but only if they're not used as substitutes for self-awareness. The real danger comes when we use them to avoid facing ourselves. That's when success becomes a drug. It numbs us, but never truly nourishes us. It's the difference between eating candy and eating a meal. One gives a short-term high, the other sustains life. Our obsession with external fixes is also deeply connected to our fear of stillness. To sit quietly with one's own mind can be terrifying. That silence often reveals buried fears, unresolved grief, or the sheer weight of not knowing who we are. So we fill the silence with noise, music, podcasts, scrolling, shopping, working, anything to avoid the voice inside that says, "I'm not okay." But here's the irony. The peace we seek in the outside world can only be found by turning inward. It doesn't mean abandoning ambition or success. It means not expecting them to do the job of self-acceptance. A person who understands themselves can enjoy success without being defined by it. They can earn money without being enslaved by the need to prove their worth. They can be praised without losing their identity in the spotlight. There's a story I often think about. Jim Carrey, after years of chasing success in Hollywood, said in an interview, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. That statement is powerful because it comes from someone who got everything, only to discover that the real answer had nothing to do with getting. The answer was about being present, being real, being whole. This realization is not an excuse to give up on goals. It's a call to reframe them. Pursue your dreams, but not because you think they'll fix you. Love your work, but don't use it to escape your inner world. Seek comfort, but don't let it distract you from the discomfort that may contain your deepest wisdom. In the end, the world outside may entertain, challenge, or support you, but it cannot complete you. Completion, if it exists, begins the moment you stop looking outward for something only found within. When you finally pause the chase and allow yourself to feel the emptiness, you may realize it's not a void to be filled, but a space to be understood. And in that space, a different kind of peace can emerge, one that doesn't depend on applause, income, or status. One that is quietly, undeniably yours. When everything on the outside starts to fail, when the job doesn't bring fulfillment, when the relationships feel shallow, when the dream vacation ends and the old anxiety returns, we naturally begin to turn inward. We start looking for answers not in material things, but in the realm of the mind. This is when many people first discover meditation, affirmations, positive thinking, therapy, or spiritual teachers. We believe, often quite sincerely, that if we can just fix our thoughts or our internal state, peace will finally come. And for a while, it might feel like it's working. The first few days of meditation can bring a noticeable sense of calm. The first therapy session might offer relief. Repeating affirmations like, "I am enough," or "I am at peace," may quiet the storm for a moment. But soon, we run into a wall the mind doesn't want to cooperate. It resists control. It loops back into old habits. It finds new ways to worry. And that's when a deeper frustration sets in, because now even the solutions that were supposed to heal us begin to feel like more things we're failing at. This is one of the most subtle and maddening aspects of the human mind. Its tendency to undermine its own efforts. The moment we try to stop thinking, we find ourselves thinking about not thinking. When we try to let go, we're actually holding on to the idea of letting go. The very act of trying becomes a form of resistance. This is the paradox that spiritual teachers have tried to point out for centuries. The effort to escape the mind is still a movement of the mind. Take the common idea of surrender in spirituality. It sounds peaceful, maybe even beautiful to surrender, let go, flow. But in practice, many people approach surrender like a goal. If I can just surrender hard enough, they think, then I'll reach peace. It's laughable, but also deeply human. Think of it like trying to fall asleep. The more you focus on sleeping, the harder it becomes. You check the clock, you count sheep, you adjust the pillow, and with each effort, you become more awake. Falling asleep only happens when you stop trying to sleep. The same is true for mental peace. It arises not from effort, but from the absence of effort. Yet our minds are trained to do, to solve, to fix. So we keep trying to fix our thoughts, and in doing so, we stir the waters even more. This is where the idea of the unconscious becomes important. The conscious mind, the part of us that plans, analyzes, and narrates, is only a tiny sliver of the total mind. Beneath is a vast ocean of unconscious patterns, memories, fears, and instincts. Trying to control the mind from the conscious level is like using a teaspoon to steer a ship. You can scoop and stir all you want, but the real movement is happening deep below. This is why people can intellectually understand that they're not in danger, but still feel anxious. Or why someone can recite, "I love myself," all day and still feel worthless at night. The unconscious doesn't respond to logic or language. It responds to deeper patterns of motion, repetition, and experience. And often, it responds in contradiction to what we consciously want. That's why you might crave closeness but push people away, or long for peace but constantly create conflict. It's not sabotage, it's the unconscious running its script. Therapy helps, to a point. It shines a light on unconscious patterns. Meditation helps too. It creates space between thought and reaction. But the key is understanding that these tools aren't meant to be used as weapons against the mind. They're not about defeating the ego or erasing thought, because the very desire to destroy the ego often comes from the ego itself. It's like a dog chasing its own tail. The ego can pretend to be the spiritual seeker. It can play the role of the peaceful person. It can wear the mask of the enlightened one. But underneath, it's still trying to gain control, to win, to be safe. This is the ultimate trick of the mind, convincing you that you can use yourself to transcend yourself. Alan Watts famously said, "Trying to get rid of your ego is the biggest ego trip of all." That line hits hard because it reveals the heart of the problem. The ego can't get rid of the ego. The mind can't fully control the mind. No matter how sophisticated the approach, whether it's scientific psychology or ancient Eastern philosophy, if it begins from a place of self-improvement, it risks reinforcing the very identity it claims to dissolve. A practical example of this is the mindfulness movement. Originally rooted in Buddhist philosophy, mindfulness was never about calming down or becoming more productive. It was about seeing reality clearly, including the uncomfortable parts. But in Western culture, it often gets repackaged as a stress reduction technique. People approach it thinking, if I meditate, I'll be less anxious, which is another way of saying, I'll control my feelings through effort. And then they wonder why it doesn't work long term. Because they're still trying to outsmart the mind rather than understand it. The shift only happens when we stop using practice as a tool for escape and begin using it as a mirror. Meditation isn't about creating peace, it's about noticing the storm. Therapy isn't about fixing who you are, it's about uncovering the stories you've inherited. Spiritual teachers aren't meant to be gurus with all the answers, they're meant to reflect your patterns back to you, so you can see clearly. This clarity doesn't come from pushing or striving. It comes from stillness, from allowing, from watching without grabbing. And in that stillness, the mind begins to settle not because you forced it, but because it's no longer being agitated. Like mud in water, it begins to sink on its own if left undisturbed. The hardest part of this journey is trusting that letting go really works. That you don't need to control every thought or fix every flaw. That peace isn't something you win, it's something that emerges when the battle ends. But this trust only comes with time, with patience, and with a willingness to stop running. In the end, the mind is not your enemy. It's not a problem to be solved. It's a process to be witnessed. And once you stop trying to escape it, you may find that it's not nearly as chaotic or dangerous as it seemed. In fact, you might even discover that the very part of you trying so hard to be free is already whole, already aware, and already at peace. In most spiritual or self-help traditions, there's a recurring theme, the idea that within each of us exists a duality, a lower self and a higher self. The lower self, often referred to as the ego, is the part of us driven by fear, pride, attachment, and identity. It's the voice that compares us to others, that obsesses over reputation, that clings to control and approval. In contrast, the higher self, or the Atman, in Vedantic philosophy is described as pure awareness, a divine or enlightened presence that remains unshaken by worldly chaos. The prevailing model suggests that the goal of inner work is for the higher self to guide, purify, or even rescue the lower self. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If both selves reside within the same being, who exactly is guiding whom? This dilemma echoes a philosophical question as old as civilization itself. Who guards the guardians? In ancient Roman philosophy, the issue of self-regulation was always met with a paradox. If the enforcer becomes corrupt, who will enforce the enforcer? If the judge is flawed, who judges the judge? This recursive problem doesn't just exist in politics or philosophy, it's baked into our inner experience. If the ego is the one doing the self-improvement, isn't it just remodeling itself in its own image? Isn't the ego trying to outmaneuver its own weaknesses with more cleverness, more control, more ambition? In everyday terms, imagine someone trying to overcome their ego-driven behavior, say, a person who wants to stop being arrogant. So they begin to work on themselves. They read books about humility, practice mindfulness, maybe even meditate daily. But slowly, something strange happens. They start to take pride in their humility. They look down on others who haven't done the work. Their spiritual discipline becomes another badge of superiority. In other words, the ego found a new costume to wear. It's no longer the loud, aggressive kind, it's now the enlightened kind. But still ego. This is the trap. The part of us that seeks improvement is often the same part that wants to be special, powerful, or beyond reproach. And no matter how high we believe our motivations are, there's always the risk that they're still rooted in egoic thinking. Even the desire to become a better person can mask the desire to be seen as a better person. Even the yearning for enlightenment can be driven by the desire to escape imperfection, to rise above the messiness of being human. But if the source of that motivation is the same structure we're trying to transcend, we're caught in a loop. Think of it like trying to lift yourself by your own shoelaces. No matter how hard you pull, you won't leave the ground because you're trying to elevate from within a system that can't fundamentally change itself. The ego improving the ego is a circular operation. And any part of ourselves that claims to be higher can still be subtly infected with ego. The moment you say, "I'm above that now," you've already created a new hierarchy and a new identity to defend. Alan Watts often spoke about this problem with a kind of amused clarity. He pointed out that the I, who wants to get rid of the ego, is the ego. The very structure of personal identity hinges on the belief that there is a central me who is steering the ship. And yet, if you look closely, that me is constantly shifting its thoughts, memories, judgments, roles. One day you're the confident leader, the next you're the ashamed failure. One moment you feel connected and compassionate, the next you're jealous and petty. So which one is the real you? If the higher self is supposed to take the reins, how do we know it's not just another projection, another ego fantasy in disguise? This doesn't mean that transformation is impossible, but it does mean that the way we think about it needs to change. Real transformation doesn't happen through domination by the better self beating down the worse self. It happens through observation, awareness, and integration. Instead of trying to conquer the ego, we begin to understand it. We watch it play its games, make its excuses, and tell its stories, and in that watching, something deeper awakens. Not a superior version of ourselves, but a witnessing presence that isn't tangled in the fight. A good example of this is someone in recovery from addiction. Many programs teach that the first step is admitting powerlessness. Why? Because the addict's ego is incredibly crafty. It justifies, rationalizes, manipulates. It wants to stay in control. And only when the person admits that their self is not equipped to fix the problem can true change begin. They stop trying to be their own savior and start really listening to something beyond their ego, to other people, to silence, to a sense of inner truth that doesn't come from willpower but from surrender. This is why many mystical traditions emphasize humility not as a performance, but as a necessary posture for awakening. You have to admit that you can't outthink your way to freedom, that no part of your ego can fix another part without just rearranging the furniture. Only then does something else become possible. Not self-improvement, but self-recognition, a seeing that goes beyond fixing. It's not glamorous. It won't get you applause. In fact, it often involves sitting in the discomfort of your own contradictions, acknowledging your shadow, and letting go of the identity that says, "I am the one who is doing the work." But paradoxically, that's where the deepest freedom lies, in not having to be the fixer, the guru, the enlightened one, and just being what you are with all your inconsistencies, without trying to layer over them with another polished mask. So when we ask, who improves who? Maybe the better question is, what happens when we stop trying to improve and start paying attention? What happens when we stop splitting ourselves into parts higher and lower good and bad, and instead start relating to our whole being with honesty and compassion? The answer is not found in control or hierarchy, but in wholeness. And that wholeness doesn't need to be fixed. It only needs to be seen. One of the most well-known insights from Buddhism is the idea that desire, or more specifically, craving, is the root of suffering. Life is painful, the Buddha taught, not just because difficult things happen, but because we cling to how we want things to be. We want health, love, certainty, and control, and we suffer because the world often refuses to cooperate. This teaching makes intuitive sense. We suffer when we lose things we care about, when we want what we can't have, or when we get what we want, but it doesn't satisfy us for long. So naturally, many spiritual seekers conclude that the answer is to eliminate desire altogether. But that's where the paradox begins. The moment you try to get rid of desire, you've created a new one, the desire to be desireless. Suddenly, you're craving freedom from craving. This is the ultimate spiritual catch-22. You want peace, so you work to detach. You want to detach so badly that you start judging yourself every time a desire shows up. You sit in meditation, trying to quiet the mind, and then get frustrated when you can't. Now you're angry about being unpeaceful, anxious about your anxiety, obsessed with your inability to let go. It's a cycle that turns spirituality into another form of performance, another achievement to chase. This dilemma shows up everywhere. People go on silent retreats, hoping to become more enlightened than their friends. They fast to purify their bodies, then boast about it online. They study ancient texts, memorize mantras, burn incense, not always out of reverence, but out of a subtle hope that if they do the right rituals, the universe will reward them with peace. But all of this striving, all this effort to escape desire, is just the ego playing dress-up in spiritual clothes. It's still chasing. It's still grasping. And the worst part? It feels virtuous. It feels noble to try to transcend desire. That makes the trap even more dangerous because now the ego feels morally superior in its pursuit. I'm not like the others, it whispers. I'm on a path. But if you're still seeking an outcome, you're still caught in the loop. You're still placing your peace somewhere in the future. Still holding on to an ideal state that you think will fix you. It's desire, just in disguise. Taoism approaches this problem differently. Instead of trying to eliminate desire or overcome the ego, Taoist philosophy invites us to act without force, to flow with life rather than against it. This is the essence of Wu Wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action. But it doesn't mean laziness or passivity. It means allowing things to unfold naturally, without pushing, without trying to control the outcome. It's the difference between a leaf falling from a tree and a person trying to engineer the perfect way for a leaf to fall. Wu Wei is visible in everyday life if you look for it. Think of an athlete in the zone, moving with grace and precision, not because they're trying harder than everyone else, but because they're relaxed, present, and attuned. Think of a jazz musician improvising, not overthinking every note, but allowing music to move through them. Think of a conversation where you're not trying to impress or dominate, but simply responding, listening, and speaking from a place of openness. These are all moments of Wu Wei, not planned, not forced, not strategic, yet deeply aligned and effective. In contrast, most of our modern life is built on the opposite principle. We push, plan, optimize, hustle. We set goals, break them into milestones, track our progress, and punish ourselves when we fall short. We even bring this mentality into spirituality. We meditate to get results. We journal to manifest better outcomes. We monitor our healing progress like it's a fitness tracker. But Wu Wei teaches that the more you chase peace, the further it gets. The more you try to force surrender, the tighter your grip becomes. Letting go isn't something you do, it's what happens when you stop trying so hard. But here's the kicker. You can't trick yourself into letting go just to get a reward. That's still control. That's still the mind trying to sneak behind the curtain and pull the levers. True letting go comes when you're willing to not get what you want, When you stop demanding life meet your expectations. When you stop trying to hack your inner world for a permanent high. One way this shows up clearly is in relationships. If you love someone because you want them to make you happy, that's not love, it's a contract. If you try to be a good partner so they'll stay or praise you, that's not love, it's strategy. Real love flows naturally when you're not attached to the outcome. You're not calculating your worth or banking emotional points. You're just showing up, present, giving without clinging. That's Wu Wei. That's freedom. The same goes for creative work. The best artists often talk about losing themselves in the process. They're not painting or writing or dancing to impress someone or to reach a benchmark. They're doing it because it feels alive. When that spark becomes commercialized or forced, the work loses its soul. The moment you try to control creativity, it dries up. But when you stop pushing and just follow the thread, something deeper emerges, something authentic, something you didn't make but merely uncovered. This is the core insight. Freedom does not come from effort, but from presence. It doesn't come from defeating the ego, eliminating desire, or achieving detachment. It comes from being here, now, without resistance, without gripping, without turning every experience into a transaction. That's what makes Wu Wei so radical. It doesn't offer a new method, it points to a different way of being. And yet, most of us will still try. We'll try not try. We'll practice non-striving with all the intensity of a corporate project. That's okay. It's part of the process. The mind needs to exhaust itself. It needs to run out of tricks. Only when we see that no technique will save us, no mantra will guarantee peace, no perfect mindset will erase pain, only then does something softer begin to arise. Not through conquest, but through collapse. Not by becoming better, but by no longer needing to become. It's deeply uncomfortable to sit in that place. It feels like giving up. It feels like failure. But underneath, it is something quietly powerful. A life that no longer depends on getting everything right. A life that doesn't need to be fixed or perfected. Just lived, moment by moment, breath by breath, without agenda. And in that space, oddly enough, many of the things we were chasing begin to show up. Joy, calm, connection. Not because we force them, but because we stop scaring them away with our neediness. Like wild animals, they emerge when the forest grows quiet again. When we stop hunting them, they return on their own. That's the paradox. That's the joke. And if you can laugh at it, you're already freer than you think. It's a strange thing to realize that all our striving, every ounce of effort we've poured into self-improvement, success, spirituality, and meaning might actually be keeping us stuck. We're told from a young age that life is about progress. You climb the ladder, you check off goals, you build a life. Even when we move into more enlightened territory, we bring the same mindset with us. We meditate to reduce anxiety. We go to therapy to be healed. We read books and take courses to become more self-aware. Underneath it all is a goal: to become someone better, more peaceful, more fulfilled. But the pursuit itself subtly reinforces a core belief that who I am right now is not enough. That belief, however quiet or unconscious, becomes the engine behind nearly everything we do. And here's the rub: whether we're striving to succeed or striving to let go, we're still caught in the same cycle. Whether we're chasing goals or chasing freedom from goals, we're still chasing. Whether we're trying to improve or trying to transcend improvement, we're still operating from the assumption that something has to change for us to finally rest. It's like trying to reach a destination by walking on a treadmill. No matter how hard you try, the ground never really moves beneath your feet. The real shift, the one that isn't written in productivity books or sold in self-help seminars, happens when that whole system breaks down. When you stop needing to become. When you stop measuring yourself against some imagined version of who you should be. When you no longer try to transcend or escape your current experience. That's when something deeper begins to unfold. Not because you finally got it right, but because you stop trying to get anything at all. This doesn't mean giving up. It's not apathy or nihilism. It's the kind of surrender that's full of life, not passive, but present. It's the quiet power of a person who no longer needs to win, who no longer feels behind, who is simply here. Not chasing anything, not proving anything, just living. You can see this peace in the most ordinary people. Not monks on mountaintops, not gurus on stages, but the grandmother who sits in her garden every morning with a cup of tea. The bus driver who hums to himself on the morning route. The man at the park bench who watches birds without needing to explain why. They are not trying to awaken. They're not trying to be in the moment. They're just there. And that's what makes it real. The absence of agenda, the absence of performance. Just life, raw and unfiltered. In fact, some of the most profound freedom isn't dramatic or flashy. Like showing up to a conversation without rehearsing. Like walking through the day without constantly questioning your purpose. That's the paradox. The more you let life be what it is, the more you feel connected to it. There's a story about a man who spent decades seeking enlightenment. He traveled the world, met countless teachers, practiced every method he could find. But nothing gave him the peace he longed for. One day, exhausted and disillusioned, he sat on a park bench and said to himself, "I give up." He stopped trying to awaken. And for the first time in years, he felt at home in the world. Not because anything changed, but because he finally stopped trying to change anything. We often think freedom is a place we reach, like a final checkpoint, but it's not a destination. It's an absence, the absence of resistance, of striving, of needing the moment to be anything other than what it is. True liberation is not something you achieve. It's what remains when the dust of ambition settles, and you realize there's nowhere left to go, nothing left to prove, and no one left to become. Ironically, this is when the most authentic parts of us start to emerge. Creativity flows more easily. Kindness becomes effortless. Presence becomes natural, not because we're trying to be good, or calm, or wise, but because we're no longer blocking those qualities with the noise of "I should." The self that we tried so hard to perfect slowly dissolves, and in its place, a more honest self appears, one that is not polished, but real. One that is not strategic, but sincere. There's a quiet kind of strength in people who have nothing to hide and nothing to chase. They don't need to talk about how enlightened they are. They're not trying to convince anyone of anything. They simply move through the world with ease, not because life is easy, but because they've stopped making it harder. They've stopped believing the lie that peace is waiting somewhere in the future. This insight often lands after years of trying. After exhausting every method, chasing every carrot, meditating through every app. But it doesn't have to take years. It can arrive in an instant, in the pause between breaths. But because there's a kind of peace that can only arrive when everything else stops. It's tempting to think this kind of awareness needs a special environment, a retreat, a forest, a temple. But you can find it in traffic, in the grocery line, in a late-night walk around your block. You can find it wherever you are, because it's not about location. It's about dropping the story that says, "I should be somewhere else, someone else, doing something else." The path to yourself doesn't begin with a goal. It begins when the goals fall away, when the chase loses its thrill, when you no longer ask what's next, and instead wonder what's now. In that space, life begins to breathe on its own. You don't need to shape it. Presence. What if you didn't have to earn your way to stillness? What if there was nothing left to improve? Nothing left to achieve? What if the whole time you were running forward? You were already standing on sacred ground? The mind doesn't like this idea. It wants a plan. It wants results. It wants to feel like it's getting closer. But the heart knows something the mind doesn't. The heart knows that the most meaningful moments in life often happen when we forget to try, when we stop becoming and start existing. You are a human being with breath in your lungs, pain in your past, and mystery in your future. And maybe, just maybe, there is nothing wrong with you. Maybe you don't need to awaken. It's a space to return to, a space where nothing is demanded of you, and yet everything is already present. So when the striving returns, don't fight it. Don't try to destroy it. Just smile at it like an old friend. Say, "Ah, you again," and gently come back here. Not to a technique, not to an identity, but to a kind of openness that doesn't need anything added. No transformación, no winning, no eraíble, just you living. If this message touched something in you, I want to thank you for being here. for listening, for staying with the uncomfortable, the subtle, the silent. It's not easy. In a world built on goals and noise, your presence is an act of rebellion. Please, if this video resonated with you, take a second to like it. Share it with someone who's quietly wrestling with the same questions. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're building a community that embraces mystery, not just motivation. And if you feel moved to support this work, consider leaving a super thanks. Every contribution helps me continue making videos that serve the heart, not the algorithm. And remember, freedom isn't out there. It isn't a destination. It's here, in the space between thoughts, in the silence beneath striving. It begins not when you become something better, but when you finally stop needing to become it all. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, just be.